Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
Where today we are celebrating our 100th episode. Who would have thought we could have made it this far?
Wow.
And having to endure all that we've endured over the last 2 years. And
2 years, yeah.
And all the mask mandates we've had to endure and all the insanity, but how providential as an act of God that our 100th podcast, we're going to be celebrating freedom from these ridiculous masks that we are not going to ever wear again.
Yeah, people thought you were like Hannibal Lecter. What's going on there? You didn't know this was a mask with the middle cut out.
So I could breathe.
So you could breathe.
That's what I would do on the airlines. I got so sick and tired of the stupidity and just that controlling spirit. Literally I would wait for the pretzels to come. So then I would pull my mask down because evidently you're not at risk when you're eating a pretzel. So, right. You pull your mask down, and then I would just nibble like a little chipmunk on my pretzel.
Licking one salt piece off at a time.
It was only an inch-long pretzel, but that could last me a 3-hour-long flight. And I would just sit there nibbling as the stewardess or whatever went by.
Yeah, fall asleep with the pretzel hanging out of your mouth.
Just smiling. Because I'm serious, it depended on the flight. Some of those folks felt like they were like Nazi prison camp wardens.
Yeah, you fall asleep, they had to wake you up because
I literally was awakened by one lady because I fell asleep and the mask was not above my nose. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And then the one lady threatened me one more time. She was going to report me, to the counter. Anyway, this is a day for freedom, and I think it's a day for us to celebrate as Americans. But man, I sure hope we learn from the insanity that we've just experienced. Here's the news headline. A federal court or district court judge in the great state of Florida, thank God for Governor Ron DeSantis and for his common sense leadership and legislation. But also thank God this was a federal court justice who clerked under Clarence Thomas. So she is a constitutionalist. Thank God for that. And finally, she had enough courage, and at least some judge had enough courage to say, "Hey, enough is enough." And I saw different video footage on people that were on airlines when this was announced, and masks were flying. And people were letting out
it's
shouts.
Like graduation day when they throw the hats out.
It was but here's what's sad is I think most folks went along with the insanity because what are you going to do? I mean, you can either be thrown off the plane or I'm not sure what your options are.
Like drive.
But somebody yelled out, "Finally!" Yeah. And again, I think most Americans, we want to go along. We want to, we want to be agreeable. But at some point, you're looking for your leadership to put their foot down. And I just, I was looking at some of the responses. Here's a medical doctor on Twitter. The White House should stop criticizing judges for removing mandates. They are abolishing the governmental power that was abused and never should have been granted in the first place, to which I say a hearty amen. Yeah. You cannot have government agencies making policy for 330 million Americans. That's not the purpose of any federal agency, to make policy. That's what our Congress is supposed to do. This was never run through Congress. This was just shoved down our throats, as we've said on this podcast, through one man in a white lab coat who was acting as the face of expert medical policy. Yep. And we've talked about this before too. You're sitting on an airplane. You can go to all these other places without a mask, but when you're on an airplane, somehow you still have to wear the mask. It's like, why? What is the purpose of this when we're all our way to the airport? No one's wearing a mask. We're living our lives without masks, but when we get to the airport, somehow we have to still wear a mask. I think it's just that final little, stranglehold of government control that says we have power over your lives, and it's fundamentally unconstitutional, and it's wrong, and I'm glad a judge finally slapped their government's hand and said enough is enough.
Yeah, well, that's good.
So here's another one I like, and this is so good. This is Melissa McKenzie. After COVID, I no longer wonder how Stalin, Mao, Hitler, and Pol Pot happened. Inside too many of our neighbors is a little tyrant who desires to tell you how to live your life, use violence to achieve their ends, and clothe themselves in righteousness while doing it. To which I say a hearty amen. I don't know if you were like me, but I was just shocked at the level of compliance that is in the hearts of most Americans. Like, not only go along, but somehow make a virtue out of going along, even when it gets down to masking kindergartners and just the shutting down businesses. The whole thing, we've talked about the government overreach.
Well, the power of fear and shame has no ends. The lure of power and shame, because, I mean, that's what they use. They use shame. I mean, we talked about this a couple Sundays ago. The kingdom of darkness used the power of shame to achieve their purpose, and that's what they used. All the virtue signaling, shame on you if you don't get a vaccine, shame on you if you don't wear a mask. I mean, all that virtue signaling.
And this even crept into the church.
Oh, shame. Oh, yeah, church is largely adapted to that, too.
So many.
We're better ashamed than some other people sometimes.
So many of the woke churches in America were all about, this was all about loving your neighbor, even though the tragic results. I mean, a lot of people are asking, what's going to be the long-term impact in the psyche of this young generation that was raised to live in hysterical fear, to think walking around in public with a mask on is normal behavior.
Yeah.
And in fact, some people were saying that if it hadn't been for this judge putting an end to this, this would have been protocol from now on out. This would be like the new norm. Everybody wears a mask, at least on airplanes. But again, I just get amazed. You wonder how does a dictator take over a country and get everybody walking in lockstep? Well, I think we saw at least a prelude to what that kind of thinking, mass thinking, looks like. Mass hysteria. Right. Calling out your neighbor, exposing your neighbor if they're not, wearing their mask, and then as you said, making them feel guilty or full of shame.
Yeah. Calling your local store, your mom and pop store, saying, "Hey, there's a guy behind the counter not wearing a mask," and send the Health and Human Service after them. I mean.
Yeah, so now we have all of our government agencies weaponized against American citizens. Yeah.
That's not the purpose of government. But okay, so I'll let you read another one. Yeah.
Here's one of my favorites. I appreciate Matt Walsh just for his straightforward way he makes a point. He says sarcastically here, "I don't care if some Nazi judge overturned the mask mandate. I'm not getting on a plane without my astronaut helmet and 3 masks. I will remain loyal to the CDC to the very end." There are people that actually have that. I saw people saying, "I'm never going to fly on the airlines until, they have mask mandates." Well, that's great. So start your own airlines and create your own rules.
You can wear your own mask. You can wear a mask. You don't have to not wear a mask. It's not like we're mandating no one can wear it. Wear your helmet if you want. Wear your astronaut helmet if you want.
Wear 3 masks if you want.
You might look funny, but no one's going to make you take it off.
But see, this is that liberal psycho mindset, because it's not enough that you have the ability to wear a mask. No one's telling you can't. Yeah. But they're upset that they can't control and make everyone act like them. And that just flies in the face of American understanding, of American life, of American freedom. The whole idea that we have to force compliance on people. And I said this a million times during this mask mandate. Anytime the word mandate is attached to anything American, it is absolutely un-American at that point.
I mean, okay, to be fair, it's because their psyche has connected lack of masks, not to lack of freedom, but if you're not wearing masks, you're in danger and you're killing people. But that is tied into the propaganda. It's deeper than just, it's tied into the CDC and all the hysteria about why masks. You got Dr. Fauci going, "Oh, you shouldn't wear a mask. Masks don't help," to masks do help, back and forth. There's a large amount of incompetence, dishonesty in these governmental agencies. That's all kind of chaos. Right. So people associate not wearing masks and not getting vaccinated as in killing your neighbors. And when you use those crazy terms, like those extreme terms like that, that's the results you get.
Right. And remember, you're going to kill grandma. We have to have masks on because you might bring the virus home or whatever. It's just fear, and then of course we had the news media that was just nonstop and driving that into our heads. So we've got liberal leftist government leaders that are control bound. We've got the news media. We got the CDC. We've got compromised federal agencies. And we have all of this politicized because, interestingly enough, all this was ramped up prior to the last presidential election to push through a lot of election policies that we had never had before.
Well, it's interesting. It's the 100th episode, right? I quickly did the math. 52 weeks in a year. So about 100 episodes. We're about 2 years into when we started this podcast. And the reason we started this podcast was because we had to close our when the pandemic first started, we closed our church for like a month or so to try to, the governor and we'll try to comply. Everyone, no one knew what was going on, and we thought it was the next plague or whatever. And so 2 years later, look what has happened. I mean, this is really sobering if you look back. 2 years later, for me, I have very little trust in mainstream media. I have zero trust. I have negative 10 trust in mainstream media.
Yeah.
I didn't have that much trust in governmental agency. Now I'm like, not just not trusting them, I'm deeply skeptical. I'm talking about the CDC, the HHS, the FBI, the CIA, with everything that's happened.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm deeply lack of trust on the election integrity system.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, these last 2 years has been, it might as well be in the last 2 decades. I mean, these 2 years were the longest 2 years probably of my life. All the lack of trust I have in social institutions and governmental institutions, it's been crazy.
Yeah.
2 years of this.
Yeah, it really exposed a lot of mindsets, ideologies. We always knew this program is about worldview, and many times there was a massive vacuum or void between the media and between Judeo-Christian worldview. In other words, our worldview is not represented in the mainstream media. Now, the logical side of that is, well, these folks are trained in liberal institutions. Many of them do not share our Christian beliefs. Yeah. They don't have a personal relationship with Christ. And so it's kind of a naive, just we don't get you guys, and what's coming out is our worldview. But I think it goes deeper than that. I mean, I used to get that, but I used to think it was just kind of benign. We don't understand each other. But now it's clearly that worldview is driving an ideology, excuse me, that is incredibly dangerous to American freedom and liberty and to our Judeo-Christian foundation.
You have common sense liberals who are turning against these agendas. Guys like Joe Rogan, guys like Bill Maher.
Yeah.
Some of these people who as a conservative, I would never listen to these guys. Now these guys are the voice of reason within these 2 years. Yeah. This is crazy what's happened in the last 2 years.
Well, and liberalism was always championing freedom of speech.
Yeah,
and now these guys that were the big champions of freedom of speech are watching all their tribe canceling everybody left and right.
They're themselves getting canceled left and right.
And they're going, whoa, so it is a brave new world in which we find ourselves when liberals are now finding more sanity in conservative camps than they are in their own camp because of how crazy and radical it's become.
Yeah, I mean, those words, liberal and conservative, I mean, those words, we had to redefine those words, in the last 2 years. So hey, we appreciate you. For those who's been with us for 2 years, man, we've been quite a ride the last 2 years, right? Talk about roller coasters of up and down, right?
Oh yeah, so it has been wild. Yeah. Let me give you another sarcastic one. But I love this. This is from Andrew Clavin. The mask mandates were difficult, but at least they accomplished nothing and made everyone miserable. So we know the federal government is still good at doing what it does. Now that's good. The mask mandates were difficult, but at least they accomplished nothing and made everyone.
I mean, I noticed you read quite a few from Daily Wire staff. Who's got some stellar staff? You got Ben Shapiro, you got Candace Owen, Andrew.
I'm not sure where some of these folks come from.
Yeah, but it's just funny. Yeah, clever, very clever.
I like this one, Monica Crowley. I'm flying tomorrow, and I cannot contain my joy at doing so without a suffocating mask plastered to my face. Jordan Shacto, the mask mandate will go down in history as perhaps the dumbest religion of the 21st century.
Oh, yeah.
And I love the way it's called a religion because people who were mask advocates adhered to it with the same, fervency as if that was their new religion. And anyway, so I appreciate that. Here's Peter Doocy with Fox News. asking a great question to the press secretary and getting an absolute stupid answer back, which is what we're kind of used to. Why is it that we sit here in the White House briefing room with no masks, but people can't sit in an airplane cabin with no mask? To which Psaki replies, I'm not a doctor. Now, we heard that same thing. Here's a straightforward, common sense question. We're all sitting here in the White House with no mask, but when we get on an airplane, we have to wear a mask. Why? I'm not a doctor. Remember when the Supreme Court nominee was asked about...
I'm not a biologist.
Yeah, I'm not a biologist. This is the kind of ridiculous stupidity that comes out of the mouth of very intelligent people when they are confronted with the fact that that all of us recognize that these mandates are ridiculous.
You know, the next time the police officer pulled me over for speeding, I'm going to be like, I'm not a physicist. You know, sir, do you know you're going 15 miles over the speed limit? I don't know. I'm not a physicist. There's some numbers thing in front of my dashboard, but I'm not an engineer. I can't. I plead the fifth. I don't know what to say. Sir, did you murder that man? I don't know. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a doctor. I mean, I don't know what happens when you shoot someone in the heart. I don't know what that means. I mean, just take that logic down the train. You know,
talk about.
Did you steal that cookie? I don't know. I'm not an adult. I don't know if I stole that cookie.
Here's somebody who makes a point just like we've been making. You can still wear a mask if you want. The people who are upset today are upset because they have lost the ability to coerce you into doing the same. Now, folks, I hope you're paying attention, because why do we want to keep electing people who have taken great joy in micromanaging every aspect of our lives? I mean, are you awake? If you don't want to live this way, make sure that you're not voting for people who share these crazy ideas. Make sure that you're voting for judges who are constitutionalists. Make sure you understand our system of government, that no federal agency should be able to make policy for Americans. That's the job of Congress. I mean, we need to get back to understanding our government the way it was created, and holding people accountable for when they get in, little power-hungry people like we've seen in Washington, D.C. I love this one. Face diapers are over. Canceled. Done. Burn them. That's the way I felt wearing those things. I felt like a face diaper. And here I appreciate Thomas Massey. You know, Thomas Massey's been a strong constitutionalist. This is what he said. He said, I haven't been on an airplane since July of 2021. I appreciate somebody who sticks to their values. He said, I have driven to D.C. every week that we have been in session because I refuse to be treated like livestock. Biden lost in the courts, and if the airlines come to their senses, I will fly again, but not until then. You know, I appreciate that. Basically saying on basis of principle, you know, I'm not going to be treated like livestock. And that's exactly what happens when we have a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach. You know, they were saying even in Washington, D.C., I was reading somebody saying that even as of today or yesterday, whenever this came out, that they still were not allowed at the check-in counter, they were not allowed to check their bag in or to get their passport until they put a mask on. Again, it makes no sense. You drove to the airport without a mask. You walked into the airport without a mask. But as soon as you get to the checkout counter at the airlines, now all of a sudden you're treated like a livestock. So anyway, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that it's over.
It reminds me of the Pharisaic rules. That's just ritualistic for ritualistic sake. It's not to serve the people. Jesus asked, is the Sabbath for the people or the people for the Sabbath?
Yeah.
You know, and the Pharisees turn around to really make Sabbath what we worship and not Sabbath for the sake of people. And that's what's happening right now. I feel like people are here to serve your rules, serve your mask mandates, as opposed to be like, wait, no, these rules are supposed to serve people. They're supposed to make sense.
Yes.
Ultimately, they're supposed to protect people.
And I'll tell you what concerns me is we are a freedom-loving people as Americans. We're not like we're watching some terrible stuff happening in Shanghai, where whole cities are brought under quarantine. What happened in Australia, what happened to our neighbors to the north, our Canadian friends. It is appalling, the government overreach and tyranny and force and violence and the rule of law that's brought to bear on people. Yeah. And talk about treating people like livestock when an entire city is shut down and people are not able to move freely about the country. They're not able to express their basic rights and liberties. They're not able to worship. I saw one picture on social media where a church in Africa opened its doors for the first time in 2 years, and people were running in just with such joy in their hearts. And again, these are all nations that do not have 200 plus years of understanding of what it means to be free men and women. And it concerns me deeply that we have got to learn from this, lest we become like some of these other nations where people are just literally treated like slaves, like livestock.
Well, that's a good point. Are we going to learn from this? Are we going to keep electing officials and or allowing these unelected agencies with their own political agenda, with unreigning power, unchecked power, tell us what to do?
Yeah. Speaking of that, talking about unchecked power, we were talking about several things that I think most Americans, when they watch the double standard that happens in Washington, D.C., the question is anybody going to be ultimately held accountable? And what we saw was the deep state. We saw the corruption of a lot of these agencies like we just talked about.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about two things that are happening right now that most Americans were wondering, is anybody going to be held accountable? One was the Durham report, which again implicates the Clinton campaign.
Attorney Sussman, who was working for the Clinton campaign. Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to get into too much of the details. I'm sure you guys are aware if you.
Yeah, and we're watching it all unfold.
But basically, they spied on the Trump campaign from before he, at least what's the Durham report indictment, before grand jury right now. I believe that's the case, or maybe it was before a judge. But during 2016, during Trump campaign to even after he became president, they were spying him. They were making up the whole Russian collusion. They were making up data. They were making up login usernames. Sussman, I believe that's the attorney's name, was spying on them. He was in their network, creating information that looked like Russian connections or Russian.
Like the Russians were stealing our election.
Well, no, that was he was colluding with the Russians somehow, and he brought those fake documents or reports to I think the CIA and I think the FBI, and that was the basis that they used to try to impeach him. Obviously, when they went through the whole year or whatever, how many months of examination through, I forgot. I think it was James Comey.
From a Christian worldview standpoint, it isn't about D's and R's. Whenever anybody behaves this way to compromise an election through fraud and disinformation, those people should be under the strictest rule of law, and justice should be done, because these types of behaviors destroy our system. It destroys the confidence in our system, and it leads to corruption and fraud. And so this is not a political thing here. We're not talking as Democrats or Republicans. We're saying for anybody in a national election for the president of the United States, the most powerful ruler in the free world, right? In the world, to see this type of behavior going on, there should be absolute consequences. These people should be put in prison. There should be serious consequences so that it does not happen again.
Well, Nixon was basically impeached for something much less worse. And it
was wrong, and I'm glad that it happened. Yeah, but this is minor compared to what's going on.
We got to read more. We got to get more information to come out. But what we're seeing so far is crazy. Every time Trump says I was spied on, people were just making fun of him, calling conspiracy theory, whatever. No, he was, according to those reports by Durham, he was absolutely spied on, and they tried to create this hoax that he was in collusion. I mean, this is crazy stuff. This is like Hollywood movie stuff that's happening in our country. And mainstream media is just shushing it up, covering up. The federal agencies are just complicit. Even when they found out it was fake, they didn't really say anything about it. I mean, man, that's crazy.
This is why, as you said, there's a negative 10% confidence in the media, because they cover up, they attack their enemies, they have a clear political bent. There's no integrity, there's no neutrality, there's no just reporting the news. There is a clear agenda, and most Americans get it. They see it, and they're fed up with it. But the question is, will justice ever be done? And so the second thing, which is encouraging, is as we're moving along, that's one thing that generally happens, is truth ultimately comes to light. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's too late. But at least truth does come to light. I thank God for people that are consistently going after exposing the lies and bringing forth the truth. The other one was, of course, the Hunter Biden laptop, which, again, got exposed in the last days of the presidential election, and it was vital information.
Got brought up in a debate, in a presidential debate. And Joe Biden was just, he was dismissing it. And they had 50 intelligence officials who came out and said that's Russian disinformation.
How many?
50.
50.
50
yeah.
former
just
intelligence committees.
50.
Yeah.
So these are all the intelligence community that are all reading off the same script. This is classic Russian disinformation. Now, again, this was a laptop that was found at a private business, right?
Pawn shop or something like that.
And contained horrific, not only horrific immoral behavior, but also
financial transaction that was
that implicated our current president using his position to incur, financial gain, illegal financial gain. So this is serious stuff. This is corruption at the highest level. And certainly should involve years and years of jail time. Instead, the media silenced it all, and these major organizations like the FBI, Justice Department, covered the whole thing, at least until after the election, and hope it went away.
Well, right now I think there's a grand jury in Delaware with Hunter Biden, and we'll see where it goes from there. But the issue was when this laptop first came out with the New York Post, which is, I think, one of the oldest news organizations in the world, in America at least, sorry, in America, not in the world. Twitter silenced it immediately.
Yep.
And stuff like this, that's just like, man, it's not just when the big media is working with big tech, with big government, with our law enforcement agency, with our central intelligence agency. Man, what world are we living in?
Oh yeah, it's scary. It's like 1984, the novel. Yeah. And this was the other thing. This is how it's all couched, of course, is that somehow social media, if there's freedom to share ideas, right, on all sides of the issue, that any idea that disagrees with mine is disinformation and it's a threat to democracy. Yeah. So that's how it's couched. You conservatives, you Christians, you folks that voice your opinion about a variety of issues, you are communicating false information, at least according to our worldview, and you are threatening to undermine democracy, and so we're going to silence you, which in and of itself threatens democracy, because it just said that there's a whole swath of people in America whose opinions and whose voices are no longer allowed to be made public. I mean, this is unbelievable tyranny. And again, of course, tyrannies are committed under the guise of doing good and preserving, the high moral ground and preserving American life and blah, blah, blah. Those are the worst types of tyrannies because they're sugar-coated with all kinds of fancy, sweet language, moral language, virtuous language, but it's nothing close to that. It's a wicked, vile assault on our most basic freedoms and liberties. And again, I heard someone saying it's so true. If I can't allow you to express your opinion, even though I stridently disagree with it, but I still respect your right to voice your opinion. Yeah. That's what this nation was founded upon, and we can debate and agree to disagree at the end of the day.
I think we can all understand when, if we play a basketball game, kids do, and then you beat me in fair and square in a basketball game, I take the ball and go home. I don't even let you guys play. It's my basketball. I don't even let you guys play. We call that immature, right?
Absolutely.
I'm taking my ball and going home. Well, that's basically what it's like. It's like, well, you can't win the debate. You don't even have a discussion. You just shut them down. It's the same thing as taking your ball and going home.
And I wanted to highlight here, as we kind of wrap up, this was the headlines from CBS News. Now, it just shows you why Christians have to get involved in all the major mountains of culture, all right? Journalism and the media almost have a complete stranglehold on, for instance, how do you report the news? You have to come up with a headline. Well, as a Christian, I get so fed up that my position is never characterized the way I see it. It's characterized through the lens of people who completely disagree with my worldview. So here's an example. We're talking about this. This is a CBS News headline. University to pay professor $400,000 after disciplining him for refusing to use correct pronouns. Now, okay, so wait a minute. Disciplining him for failure to use correct pronouns. What correct pronouns are we talking about? Him, her, she, him, it, I, me, you, whatever. What are these pronouns? Well, of course, this is written from people who are pushing crazy
gender
identity with 1,000 pronouns out there that this professor is supposed to somehow use because student A wants that pronoun used to describe her or him or it or they or them or whatever the crazy, they're binary, non-binary. This is all crazy woke gender ideology. Well, this university, this guy sued them because he was using the correct pronoun, or at least he wasn't going to play their game. But here's my point. CBS News says using failure to use correct pronouns, to which one of my friends over at the Alliance Defending Freedom wrote, "You misspelled, quote, incorrect." So in other words, they should have said failure to use incorrect pronouns. That's our position. He was using correct pronouns. CBS News says he was using incorrect pronouns. Now, what is the standard for truth there? And obviously, we're living in a world where people are making up their own ideologies and their own realities. But for Christians, we don't get to play with reality. We have the Word of God, and we have a God who created us and who reserves the right to determine what truth is. Yeah. And so we don't get to make up pronouns. We don't get to make up genders. We don't get to pretend who we are. We were created in the image and likeness of God. We're men and we're women, and our pronouns reflect that. And as soon as we start going into this crazy ideology and letting the media dictate what truth is, without us being able to push back, we're entering a very scary, scary world, and that's where we find ourselves. So, but the positive side was, here's a judge saying, you can't fire this professor just because he's not living in your alternate universe and failing to use whatever pronoun you want to use today or tomorrow or the next day.
I think in this case, what happened was when they first went to court, basically, I forgot what university it was. It was disciplining this professor for he's a Christian professor.
Yep.
He declined to use whatever the preferred pronoun for this transgender student. He did offer to not use Mr. or Mr. or Miss something. Yep. Just use their last name or something like that. But they were like, no, if you did that, you have to not use Mr. or Mrs. for everybody in the classroom. Anyway, I don't get it.
Yeah, he wasn't trying to be nasty or mean or rude.
It wasn't. It was kind of. But anyway, so they went into the court, and the court says, no, you to the professor, you've been given freedom of choice. But then they appeal. I guess, and the appeals court says, no, this needs to go back to the original court. And then when they went back to the original court, the university settled for $400,000, and they will not force them to use whatever preferred pronoun. But I thought the way that CBS framed this was interesting, because it's like people coming up to you and say, hey, Ron Johnson, explain to me why you are a racist.
Yeah.
It's like, even the way they frame the question, like you're really on defensive at a loss, or you're really lost home court advantage. You start a football game down 30-0.
Oh yeah, because now you have to react to the question, which isn't true, and you have to be defending yourself.
Yeah, you're like, wait, I'm not. Wait, what? I mean, like that's how they framed it. It's like incorrect. I mean, there's so many other ways to give that statement without even use correct, incorrect. You can use preferred. You can be like, what's the contentious pronoun, whatever. But they decide to inject their worldview, and that's an obvious example of that. And I'm just like, how often when we read headlines, when people interact with us, they're being trained by these intellectual ivory towers to start the conversation, putting you into their home court.
Well, think about all the issues that matter to us, like medical freedom. Oh, you're anti-vaccine.
Yeah.
No, we're pro-medical freedom. Oh, on an abortion.
You're anti-science. Yeah.
You're anti-choice.
Yeah.
No, we're really pro-choice. We just want you to be held accountable for the choices that you make.
Yeah.
I mean, the list goes on and on and on. We're always anti. That's how we're always against. And when you're the position where you're always got your hands up and you're the angry mob that's always against, that doesn't come off well. When I would always tell the reporters, look, if you're going to interview me, don't call me anti-choice, call me pro-life. But that's not the language that they're able to use, because they have their little book of words and how they're to report. But the point is, it all comes out of your worldview, and that's why we have to win at the basic level of worldviews. We've got to lead people to Christ. We have to disciple them. I mean, this is a great commission that Jesus said to go and disciple nations. But bottom line is, and I think this has been the contention of this podcast, is we belong in every arena of life. We belong in law, we belong in government, we belong in the courts, we belong in media. We belong everywhere, because if our salt and light, our presence is not there, we end up being absolutely overrun by an ungodly, humanistic, man-centered, godless worldview that always leads to tyranny. And so for the sake of our nation, and for the sake of liberty, and for the sake of freedom, we must get involved. And maybe that's a good way to stop. So, hey, thanks for watching our 100th podcast. This is a celebration that truth wins, that Jesus Christ is Lord. And we want to we hope there will be 1,000 of these podcasts before the Lord comes. Is that our time that we're up? Yeah. So anyway, any final volleys? I mean, I am rejoicing to be able to travel.
There's a lot that we can talk about. I think the thing in my heart is, we've been articulating from the very beginning, the biblical worldview is for all have fallen short. Sin is, we have sin's rampant in our world today, and Jesus Christ is the solution. There's no utopian nature from human strength, human will, human ability. Yeah. The only true utopia is the kingdom of God. It's the kingdom of heaven. And on our own ability, we can't get there. And when we see these big government institutions and big pharma, big tech go corrupt, and they start to make policies that's for their own interest, I am not surprised. Yeah. Because I know what's in the man's heart. Yeah. And when there's ultimate power, there's no accountability. There's absolutely going to be perversion, corruption, collusion. Yeah. It's human nature. And history. Study history.
That's right. Part of it is, I'm listening to the biography on John Quincy Adams right now, which I'm really enjoying. But I'm amazed at, even at for instance, the birth of our nation, there was an element that was trying to have George Washington overtaken by a coup to get him out of office because he wasn't supporting the French, or they wanted him to support the French and the French Revolution. And I'm listening here going, overthrow George Washington? You can't. I mean,
different America.
But my point was just what you said. We're in a spiritual battle. That spiritual battle will be taking place until Christ returns. In fact, it's going to intensify. So I just want to encourage us: don't get weary in the fight, and don't avoid the fight as if it's a Christian thing to do. Avoid the fight. No, we're fighting for the soul of our nation. We're fighting for the liberties that we love and hold dear. We're fighting for the ability to keep preaching the gospel, which is the foundation of our religious liberty and foundation of what the church is called to do. So don't be shocked, as Pastor Andrew said, like, oh my gosh, there's a fight. There's going to be a fight from the very beginning and a fight to the very end. And so, learn to get battle tested, get involved, don't shy away from the battle. There's way too much depending on it. And in the end, we win. And that's what I want to encourage you with. We want to encourage you with. So have an amazing week. Thanks for being a part of this 100th episode of our podcast. We hope you'll share it far and wide with our friends. And let's just celebrate. As for me and my house, never again on these ridiculous mask mandates. It really is time to stand up as a free people. So thanks so much. We'll look forward to being with you next week.